Chapter 37 Chipped Part 1 Cain Eastmont was born at a large hospital in Colorado Springs. A healthy baby boy, neither him nor his parents were aware of how much one piece of technology would impact his entire life. That technology was a standard implant that allowed people to be identified by the network. Introduced in the early 2020s at about half the size of a grain of rice, the implant began as a disease tracking method after the coronavirus pandemic that ravaged the planet in the early years of the decade. In the beginning, only those that had been sick or were wealthy had them. But by 2030, they had become mainstream and replaced Social Security numbers as the primary population accountability measure in the United States. Proposed by clever legislators in the US, and eventually around the world, lawmakers argued that this technology would allow for more accurate census taking and ultimately lead to more efficient use of limited energy resources. Progressive government leaders around the world regarded it as a green measure that would contribute to the reduction of global warming, allow for worried parents to keep better track of their children, and provide other small conveniences for the common citizen, though these were never stated explicitly. The massaging of the rhetoric, combined with the release of bingeable media propaganda showcasing how the technology benefited everyday people, made the old world public accept the measure en masse. As a result, the general population, born before 2030, lined up in droves to get chipped. Although the 30s were characterized by global outbreaks of disease, war, and an unprecedented amount of natural disasters, cyberization, as it was colloquially known, provided an unexpected boost to the global economy during the entire decade. Billions of people in the developed and developing worlds willingly allowed a permanent technological tracking device to be inserted into their bodies in order to reap the socially accepted benefits. Most did so without real knowledge of how the technology really worked or how its presence under their skin would affect their lives. Cain, short in height, with a frame like an aged tree stump, skin smooth and brown as the toughest of leather, was one of those people who jumped in on the social media labeled "I am robot" movement of the 30s. Born in 2015, he had begged his parents to allow him to get the implant on his 15th birthday. His money-conscious millennial parents, scarred by decades of crushing student loan debt, the memory of their economic struggles always fresh in their minds, refused. That was when he decided to take matters into his own hands. Headstrong, stubborn, and quite invincible, he enlisted the help of a friend to arrange the procedure at one of the biodigital clinics in a nearby neighborhood. Some of these clinics had been established with well-known and reputable medical providers. Others were essentially run by engineers and hobbyists with enough knowledge of medicine to place the chip safely in the body. Cain chose the latter, and after paying $500, he joined the ranks of the chipped ones. When his parents found out about it days later, they were livid, until they discovered that the chip could be used to track his movements and biological data in real time. Cain's plan had backfired. For the next 3 years, his comings and goings were heavily scrutinized by the vigilant eyes of his parents. However, on the day of his 18th birthday, he had the option to disable parent tracking for good and emancipate himself from their control. From that day forward, he became the owner of his personal data. It was the law, and he was glad for it. Soon after turning 18, Kane left his parents' house to move in with a few friends on the south side of Colorado Springs. It was a shabby apartment in a rundown neighborhood, and he shared the living space with 3 others, but at least he was finally away from his ever-suspicious parents. There, he got word that new upgrades were being developed for the chip. These enhancements ranged from helping the host to study more effectively to stimulating testosterone production, leading to greater muscle gains and increased libido. "It makes your dick bigger, dude," one of his friends said to him one day. Kane was very interested, but he needed money. So he found a job working in the kitchen of a Mexican seafood restaurant and began to slowly accumulate savings. After 2 years of slaving and saving, he received his first enhancement at the age of 20. Although the testosterone augmentation was tempting, he exercised better judgment and chose the study enhancement. Fed up with coming home reeking of catfish, he wanted a better life and figured a job in technology would always be in demand. His study augmentation in place, Kane began the program the next day. Whenever he activated his newly enhanced chip, his mind became a task machine, capable of hours of uninterrupted focus and concentration. The noise of his chaotic inner thoughts and biological cravings fell silent, causing the world around him to fall away, leaving only him, his hands, and his desired goal. Nothing else mattered in those moments, and as a result, his progress in his learning was incredibly fast. By the time he turned 21, less than a year after beginning his studies, he worked his way to a well-paying position as a junior software developer. The job would be his first step in what would become his primary career for the next 2 decades. Like the majority of people in his age cohort, Kane relied heavily on the network for most aspects of his life. He formed relationships in virtual environments, consumed media, and conducted business using it. When he was unsure about something, he often consulted it before approaching another person. Any photos or videos that he recorded, no matter how brief or trivial, automatically flew into his server via lightning-quick connections, allowing him to replay the events of his entire life back to himself or anyone else at any time. He lived on the network, and the network lived within him, eventually learning more about him than he knew about himself. "25 years later, Kane sat alone in his large house. The home was located in an upper-middle-class neighborhood, overlooking Interstate Highway 25, with the view of city lights of Colorado Springs twinkling in the distance. That night, the sky was dark outside, with traces of the day's low-hanging thunderstorm clouds concealing a sliver of a moon visible through the window of his dimly lit home office. The light of a large computer monitor illuminated the room as Kane calmly typed away to complete a work presentation that he was due to give the following morning. Then, out of nowhere, the screen flashed a series of foreign colors. First, the flashes were widely spaced, then became more frequent until they blurred together and appeared as a white screen. What the hell? Assuming some kind of malfunction, he slowly reached toward the outlet to reset the hardware. However, before his hand reached the power strip, without warning, every moment of triumph in his life up to that point replayed itself in his mind's eye. The images cycled like a person quickly reviewing a slide presentation before a meeting. Just enough time to look and see, not enough time to absorb or focus. It made him feel dizzy and sick. He suppressed rising bile back down his throat. What in the world is happening? His sexual conquests, professional victories, and even quiet personal achievements were presented before him, reminding him of the trajectory his life had taken up to that point in time. In his office chair, he tried to blink the visions away, but they would return, beckoning him to view the flurry of pictures from his past. Kane clenched his eyes shut, hoping the visions would pass. He held them closed for what he felt like was enough time, but when he opened them, he was no longer in his office chair. Where is this? He was standing in some kind of chamber. It reminded him of a cold medieval dungeon, and looked as if it should have been freezing inside. But Kane did not feel cold, even though he only wore a white t-shirt and sleep pants. He examined his surroundings. The room was completely sealed. No entrances, exits, or windows. The only objects he could see were large cylinder-shaped pedestals arranged in a uniform circle near the center of the space. There were 7 in all. Kane swallowed hard and took cautious steps toward the pedestal closest to him. What he saw made his jaw drop in disbelief. This is my memory. The forgotten image floated in a smooth bubble before his eyes. In it, he was 25 years younger, thinner, and with more hair, proudly holding a Best Junior Programmer award in one hand, while the other clasped the hand of his long-dead senior developer. No way. This can't be real. His vision turned to the other spheres. They too held different memories. Some Kane had long forgotten about. What the? He studied, half in shock, the 7 ecstasy-filled highs and the devastating lows of his life, not sure what to do or think. Why am I here? He wondered, as he carefully approached a glowing memory of a recent love affair with a woman named Daphne. Oh, Daphne. The memory stood out, not just because of her allure and seductive attractiveness, but because he often slept the best when she was around. Post-coital rest, in general, was some of the best sleep he had had throughout his life. And with Daphne, the effect had been magnified. I wonder what will happen if I... Holding his breath, he reached out to touch the memory, unsure of what he expected to happen. Upon contact, a flood of emotion inundated and overloaded his mind. Connection, intimacy, love, all mixed in his blood, detonating a blast of sexual energy throughout his body. Hands at his sides, his heart began to pump harder, faster and faster, as blood began to flow into his loins. His body began its familiar cycle of tension and release. Not long after, the quickening captured him, holding him in the grip of the primal rhythm. Kane's face contorted, his body clenched as he climaxed, then fell to the floor in a spent heap. On the floor, eyelids heavy, he fell into a blissful sleep. He awoke seated at his desk, in his home office. A light drizzle fell outside in the night sky. The pitter-patter on his window reached his ears. The same mundane work slideshow displayed on his monitor. Nothing had changed, except for Kane himself. His body still harbored traces of his physical arousal. According to his device, Both his heart rate and blood pressure were still elevated above normal levels. He also felt breathless, sluggish, and lethargic, but strangely at peace. A feeling of euphoria clouded his brain. He lay back in his chair to savor it, eyelids drooping, thinking of Daphne. After several minutes passed, the sensation began to subside. At that moment, the coldness of reality and the fabric within his underwear reached his awareness. Embarrassed at his soiled undergarments, he immediately exchanged them and his sleep pants for clean clothes. As he changed, questions about what he had just experienced entered his mind. What just happened to me? Was it a dream? Some type of weird neurological disorder? He had heard stories of chips going bad in certain people and causing all sorts of odd medical problems as they aged. But this didn't seem like anything he had ever heard or read about. It was something completely different. Though he felt somewhat ashamed at losing control of himself, a part of him was captivated by the mysterious thrill of it. The room, the memories, the odd ejaculation were all pieces of a puzzle that Kane had to solve. He wanted more. Chapter 38, Chipped, Part 2. The next night, it happened again. The same series of flashes invaded his vision, and he was again transported to the circular room. Two things were different about it this time. From where he stood, Kane turned around and, behind him, noticed an arched door that clearly would return him to his home office. I can go back if I want to. In the somewhat fuzzy image, he saw himself sitting there. His body was in a calm state of repose, as if he were taking a short nap. The expression on his face was peaceful. His chest rose and fell softly at steady intervals. So strange. He had never seen himself sleep before. The sight made him feel vulnerable and uncomfortable. Returning his attention to the room, the cylindrical pedestals again housed memories, but all were different from the night before. Which one should I choose tonight? Without awareness of any time limit or rules related to the room, he felt more anxious about his choice than the night before. Whatever this was, it was clear he could only make one choice. He had no idea if he would be able to come back. There was another memory of him and Daphne on the day of their breakup. As usual, they had sex, but it was different that time. It was a mournful act, absent of their usual intimacy or togetherness. It had been a desperate move on his part, a final plea to win her back, after his careerism and workaholic nature pushed her away. It failed, and Kane was full of regret and sadness at the scale of the loss he was feeling. On that final night of their relationship, he had pushed the feelings down, not wanting to look or feel weak. He knew Daphne could see through his tough guy act. He knew her heart bled for him, herself, and the crippling loss that often accompanies ending a long and promising relationship. But she had made her decision, and that time, it was final. Echoes of the memory welled up within him as he viewed the floating sphere. Kane reached out his hand. At the last second, he dropped it. I don't need to revisit that one. Exercising monumental willpower, he forced himself not to look at the memory, then took small steps backward toward the arched doorway. The other Kane was still in a tranquil position of sleep. Looking at himself, he began to feel drowsy. This was all strange and overwhelming to him, and he had no idea how to proceed. He took timid steps toward the doorway, then suddenly stopped. If I go back now, I might not have another chance. Decision made. Kane turned away from the arched door and decided to look around the chamber. The search didn't last long. Kane had walked around the room several times, standing on his toes, pushing in on the walls, dropping to his knees and examining the floor in detail. He found nothing. The only exit was the arched doorway. The only objects in the room were the pedestals with the memory clouds on top. Disappointed, and more tired than before, he approached a memory of a fight that occurred between him and a friend back during his Mexican seafood kitchen days. Kane didn't have a great recollection of the fight, but he recalled fragments. He and several other friends had been heavily drinking that night at a bar in downtown Colorado Springs. In the haze of alcohol and smoke, he vaguely remembered feeling triggered, then being on the floor. He remembered talking to the cops and a few of his friends the following morning to get the details. His memory stopped there. He hadn't thought about it in a long time. That must have been over 25 years ago. Scratching his head, staring at the memory, some details of the history between himself and the friend came to his mind, almost unexpectedly. His name was Tony. He had been one of the guys he lived with after he moved out of his parents' house. He was the guy that told him about the chip augmentations back in the day. Tony was a good friend, but he could also be a real asshole if he thought Kane wasn't being man enough when it came to certain things. Didn't matter if it had to do with women, school, or work. Tony's solution was always domination or shows of force. Kane tolerated it because Tony was really funny, and he felt like a more fun person by just being in his presence. However, their friendship began to fray when both received their chip upgrades. Unlike Kane, Tony chose the testosterone upgrade. The increased juice, as he liked to call it, changed him from being a dick to an even bigger throbbing dick. All he talked about from that day on was how many women he fucked, or was going to fuck. Yo, Kane, you ever had sideboard pussy, bro? He asked Kane one random afternoon. Nah, never. It's the best. You missing out, my man. Kane just shook his head and continued studying. Tony was funny, but the upgrade had made him even more annoying. Kane decided to spend less time with him. Instead, he dedicated himself even further to his studies so he could begin his career as a programmer. That would also get him away from Tony, eventually, he hoped. Weeks later, at a party, Kane was hanging out with Kayla. She was a cute brunette with pixie hair and a smoking body. She was a CrossFitter and a mountain climber, and she could also drink him under the table. a true Colorado-born beauty. She was a friend of a friend that Kane had seen at the bar for the last several weeks. On that particular night, he had finally gotten the nerve to talk to her. They had an instant connection. They talked, drank, and threw darts for hours. Things were going well. Everything was great until, like flies to an outdoor barbecue, Tony sidled up beside him and forced an introduction. His flamboyant clothing, a lime green t-shirt and dark skinny jeans, complemented by a pair of all-white sneakers, reminded Kane of that rapper Lil Nas X in that old video, Old Town Road. Except he wasn't him. He was Tony, the biochemistry major at the University of Colorado Springs by day and self-proclaimed pimp by night. He was a poser, a fake, a sim. In that moment, Kane hated him, and when he rolled up on him and Kayla in the corner of that bar, that had been the last straw. Kane stood before the pedestal, head tilted at a contemplative angle. I wonder if the bad memories are as potent as the good ones. With a shaking hand, Kane reached out and touched the memory. The next instant, his muscles tightened, jaw clenched, as his thinking brain shifted into animal action. The aching of muscles, tendons, and joints that he had experienced on that night in the bar dredged itself back from the depths of the past. The emotional blow of the betrayal that he felt hit hardest. Tony, how could you talk to her when you knew it was going well for me? You're an asshole, man. You always have been. His mind replayed the long-forgotten thoughts and feelings, as if the scroll bar on a video had been rewound to that precise moment in time. Kane's conscious brain had buried the details long ago, but his body remembered. Every punch, kick, knee from Tony that impacted his face, chest, and ribs hit him again and again. But this time, there was no alcohol to deaden the pain. Every hit landed with unexpected gravity, multiplied by the emotional scar of the collapse of his friendship with Tony. The combination of everything was so great that Kane eventually passed out. When he opened his eyes, he was back in his office in front of his computer. A cool, starry night outside of his window. Kane sat, drenched in sweat, exhausted and sore. He sat low and didn't move for a while. It was an attempt to calm himself down after the sudden shock of the memory. It let me relive that horrible memory too. What the hell is this? Kane wanted answers. He labored to take a shower, fighting through pain and soreness as he stripped off his smelly clothes. Before he stepped in, he stood naked in front of the mirror and looked at himself. His middle-aged body, now approaching 50, was there in all its former glory, as usual. The inflated belly and breast-like pectorals were there. Scanning lower, his once muscular legs showed the early signs of old age. The skin looked as if it was slowly sliding toward the floor. While disheartening, this too was normal. But one thing was not normal. Something that should have been there, but was not. No bruises? Despite the sweat, his skin appeared normal in color, but there was no swelling or blue or black bruises anywhere to be seen. Kane turned his arms, even activated the reverse shower mirror to see his back. There was nothing. Weird. I definitely feel like I was in a fight. It was like something had played with his nervous system, as a hacker would attack a network. The internal alarms were going off, but everything appeared normal to the casual eye. The detail added to the mystery of it all. It made Kane want to know more. Showered, and feeling slightly better, it was 2 a.m. when he set to work to consult the network for answers. For an unknown number of hours, he scoured forums, social media, and his chosen silo of news outlets for information. He tried several search terms: the circular chamber, floating memory spheres, spontaneous ejaculation, repressed memories, out-of-body experiences. While they yielded interesting data, none of it was related to what he was searching for. How does it choose which memories to display? Why did it choose me? He held these questions and more in his head as he continued to investigate. Next, he messaged the few friends that he could reach at the late hour about what he had experienced the last 2 nights. None had any idea what he was talking about. They just blamed stress and overwork, then told him to get some sleep. But Kane wouldn't rest. His analytical mind would not allow it. Despite the overwhelming fatigue he felt from the fight, he continued his research. By 4 a.m., he was ready to give up. Heavy eyes and even heavier limbs begged him to concede and go to bed. There has to be something out there about this. Then he made a promising discovery. There was a forum with a dozen or so respondents that spoke of similar incidents happening to them. Many described re-experiencing memorable sexual encounters, just like he had, while others spoke of reliving past wins in business or satisfying moments of peace with deceased family members. I felt a tingling warmth, like I had only known sitting and watching the sunset with my husband, who passed away over a decade ago. It almost felt as if he was sitting right beside me again, wrote someone who went by the name Broke Millennial 90. The accounts had been helpful, but they hadn't explained the how or the why. It wasn't enough. So Kane continued his exhaustive research, fighting stinging eyes and the physical fatigue that comes from a middle-aged man participating in a 20-something-year-old's feud. As dawn light began to filter through his office window, he felt he could continue no more, and moved to close his browser, when one forum thread caught his eye. It lets you see and experience the future? Was the title of the thread. It contained only one comment. It had just been updated only 15 minutes before, according to its timestamp. Kane leaned forward in his chair, eyes narrowed, lips pursed, as he began his scan. The post was long and detailed, with the author, who Kane suspected was a man, writing incoherently in a style of stream of consciousness that was difficult to digest. The user, Gemini 36, described having always wanted to have been a comedian growing up. Though he had given stand-up comedy a try for 2 years after high school, life got in the way. and he had to walk away from it to take care of elderly family members, defining it as the new rite of passage for his generation. Past much rambling, Kane skimmed halfway down the screen until the man described his encounter with the circular dungeon-like room. "This is it," he wrote. Okay, I had been reliving my greatest hits for about a week. A week isn't that long of a period of time to go through some of the most powerful memories embedded somewhere in my brain, some of which I had even forgotten were there. Anyway, on the 6th night, I was really wanting to experience a road trip that I had taken with my friends in San Jose. We ended up getting lost near Big Basin among these fucking towering trees, and we were freezing, like your nuts might fall off freezing. But it was one of the most memorable moments of my life. So on the 7th night, the memories were arranged as usual, but they were different. I didn't recognize any of the images, people, or events in them. Damn, I'm telling you, they even looked different, with hard angles replacing the normally smooth and curvy outlines of the memory bubbles. This is my name for them. You can thank me later. At first, I was gonna leave, but I was just so damn curious when I saw one that had an older man on stage in front of a large crowd of people in a dimly lit room with a spotlight trained on him. I thought, no way, at first, but after I touched it, I knew the truth. It wasn't a memory, but a vision of me in the future. I was living my comedy dream. I felt the adoration of the crowd, that one-of-a-kind feeling that comes from knowing that you made someone laugh, the feeling of having crafted and delivered the perfect setup, followed by a killer punchline. I got it all. It was incredible. Okay, so after all that, I waited until the next night to see more future visions. That was only one of several that had been displayed to me. But instead of the standard ring of neatly arranged memories, there was only a single one in the center of the room. It looked like one of the future memory bubbles, not the normal ones, so I touched it. I felt safe and secure in my favorite position, which is lying on my back, in my bed. I like seeing my stomach rise and fall, you know. I don't care if I'm a little chubby now. It reminds me I'm alive. Anyway, as I lay there, a voice started talking to me as if I were listening to some kind of old audiobook. It started telling me about something called a Comville, and that I should go to one if I wanted to have access to more memories and future visions. Brother, I tell you, I looked these places up, and I know they've had some bad press over the years, but I started packing my bags that very same night. There's one not too far from where I'm at now, and I'm gonna join. If I can get more access to the memories, and possibly even the future me, I'd be crazy not to do it. Kane vigorously rubbed his eyes. His mind felt tangled from everything he had read, and he needed to give himself a second to absorb it all. He leaned back in his chair, wincing from his invisible muscle pain. So, that's how it works. Gemini 36's post was what he had been looking for. If what he wrote was true, he had 4 more days of memory bubble options until the future visions would appear, and he would be subsequently invited to join a Comville. He had heard of Cereus and its terrorist offshoot, Limnic, on the news and on social media, but didn't really know much about them outside of their names. Now, he wanted to know more, but that would have to wait for another night. Exhausted, the morning sun on his face, he crawled into bed and slept for almost the entire next day. The rest of the week passed, just as Gemini 36 foretold. The appeal of experiencing the memories and the possibility of the future functioned like a black hole, pulling Kane involuntarily into its unknown center depths. On the 6th night, he saw a vision of himself in the future. He had a family, felt secure and accomplished with the events of a life well lived. His wife was Daphne. They had one daughter together. It was a feeling that overwhelmed his unprepared psyche with boundless joy. On the 7th night, seated in his favorite office chair, his body tingled with delight as he listened to a soothing female voice describing the Comville way of life, how it could benefit him personally, and help him put his programming skills to use in service of others, while still providing a good life for him and his potential future family. On the 8th, Kane was on the road, headed for the nearest Comville. It was down south, in Pueblo, a town he had only driven through, but had never really explored. I wonder what it will be like there. His job was remote, and he could get a friend to rent his house, but neither of those things concerned him much. As his car drove him south, he contacted Daphne for the first time in 2 years. She answered on the 2nd ring. "It's been a long time," he said. Daphne laughed. "I knew you'd call eventually."
Chapter 39. Best Friend First Class. "You're already done?" Harpreet asked Jinhua. It had only been 10 minutes since their physics committee ended, yet she was shocked that her friend had already completed the balancing of forces homework that they had only been assigned 30 minutes prior. Jinhua stretched her arms over her head, then flashed a prideful smile. "It wasn't too bad. I just wanted to make sure you had an accurate answer key to go off of." Harpreet slapped her arm with playful force. "Show off." They both laughed. The two teenagers walked out of their committee room in the old furniture store. The murmuring of sporadic conversations filled the air, a stark contrast from the bustle and noisy atmosphere that usually dominated the community center during weekdays. It's always better on weekends, Jinhua thought. Fewer crowds and less noise made it easier for her to think, something she had been doing a lot of lately. She and Harpreet walked to the food stall set up near the far end of the former mall. The menu was small, selling American staples like hamburgers, hot dogs, fried potatoes, and the like. The food was good and reasonably priced. A perfect hangout spot for two adolescents after a math committee on Saturday. It was their food stall. Without really considering their appetite, they each purchased an order of well-seasoned fried potatoes and sunsweet prune smoothies, a local staple, from the young, gleeful, bearded stall operator. He had not worked there long, but Harpreet liked him. Parts of him were manly, large head, broad shoulders, brown beard. Other parts were not. His mannerisms, soft eyes, smooth hands, and melodious voice. A good mix of hard and soft, masculine and feminine. Harpreet wondered if he was gay or questioning. Probably a little of both. He handed her a plastic tray with their order and flashed a coquettish wink. Who cares? Harpreet thought. He's hot. She considered making a comment to Jinhua about how the hot stall operator had made her heart go doki doki, but stopped when she looked in her direction. Her friend was standing there, but she stood with vacant eyes, looking but not seeing, hearing but not listening. She's doing it again. Harpreet nudged her. Hey, Mars to Jinhua, you copy? Jinhua absent-mindedly raised her hand to her mouth and spoke as if she were communicating through a walkie-talkie radio. Yeah, I copy. Over. Harpreet wanted to mimic her gesture like she used to when they were young, but she was holding the tray, which prevented her from raising her arms. Come on, let's eat. Jinhua nodded, then followed her to uncomfortable metallic chairs situated around a small brown circular table in front of the stall. The two sat and began to eat. They ate in silence, with only low echoes of mall conversation and golden oldies floating in the air around them. Harpreet recognized the song Complicated by Avril Lavigne. She didn't know the lyrics, but she knew the sound of the intro chord. It was an old song she had heard many times at her grandmother's house, an unconscious memory from long ago. She's lost again, Harpreet thought. The jovial mood of 5 minutes ago was long gone. The lack of conversation between them made her desperate to find the words to pull her friend out of her pit of melancholic reflection. Harpreet regarded Jinhua's face. The slightly pressed lip and slackened posture were signs she was ruminating on something, attempting to see the scenario from all possible angles in order to consider perspectives and variables that were previously unseen. The steam from the tiny box of fried potatoes gradually faded as they sat half-eaten. The smoothie converted itself into a slushed mess as it began to melt. Her mouth stuffed full of fried potatoes, Harpreet sighed through her nose. Several weeks prior, Jinhua told her about the truth of her origins. It had taken some prying to circumvent her somewhat private nature when it came to information her friend designated as highly classified, something Harpreet considered herself very good at. But once she did, the floodgates of emotion, pain, and uncertainty were open. Since that day, Harpreet struggled to support her in the right way. Advice on guys, general money matters, and girl stuff she could handle. But digitally infused human beings and robot twins were beyond her comprehension. They made her feel out of her depth, way above her pay grade as Jinhua's self-appointed best friend. Since then, Jinhua's moods came in sudden bursts. At one moment, she was her competitive, measured, and big-brained self. In the next, she became withdrawn and temperamental. Fits of uncharacteristic emotional outbursts and long stretches of self-exile into her own head characterized these periods. To Harpreet, it felt like riding a fast roller coaster. At times exhilarating, terrifying, and nauseating, always with the knowledge that she may be thrown from the ride at any second. Still, she continued to endure the long line and stomach-turning drops to ride over and over again. Days ago, during a committee session, Jinhua requested to use the bathroom and did not return for a long time. After 40 minutes passed, alarm bells went off in Harpreet's head, and she rushed to go search for her. She checked every bathroom, her sense of dread mounting with each unanswered response to her calls. Jinhua, you in there? she called, inside every toilet in the community center. Please be alive. Eventually, she found her sobbing in a toilet stall in a woman's bathroom at the opposite end of the old mall. Jinhwa's red face and swollen eyelids told her that she had been crying hard. Harpreet listened with big sister sympathy, holding her friend as she witnessed her breakdown. Jinhwa resented her father for not telling her sooner, yet felt tremendous respect and empathy toward him for having the courage to tell her from his difficult position. She wailed for the mother that she would never know. She felt terrified for the uncertainty of her physical body and mind. Then what of Daniel? She had no idea how to begin to understand her otherworldly connection with him, or how that might affect them both in the future. Would she die an early death due to the unknown interaction of her biology and the digital redundancies? Would she end up like so many other failed experiments that were the countless babies that had not survived the process? I feel like a freak, she sobbed, her head buried in her hands as she slumped forward on the toilet seat. Harpreet stood beside her and stroked her hair gently, attempting to provide calm. She swallowed and made an attempt to lighten the mood. At least all of your thoughts are backed up on a server somewhere. Who knows just how much you could get online for a file copy of just your calculus committee notes. The joke brightened Jinhwa's mood temporarily. She let a small smile take shape on her face. I just wonder what's going to happen with me. I feel so lost. Hey, well, at least your dad said that you had a clean bill of health. Totally normal for someone your age. Except for your oversized brain. Though I suppose nothing could be done about that. Their laughter echoed throughout the bathroom, providing a much-needed shift in the air around them. Harpreet enjoyed seeing her smiling again, even if it was only for a moment. The two friends embraced each other tightly and exited the stall. We'd better get back to committee before MS Rhodes decides to assign us extra homework, Harpreet said, still holding Jinhwa's hand. Okay, I'll be there in a second. Just gotta clean myself up a little bit. Harpreet arched her eyebrows, skeptical of her words. I promise, I really am going back to the room, Jinhwa protested sheepishly. Harpreet squeezed her hand, then released it, as she turned toward the door and pressed it open. Okay, I believe you. Before she exited, she looked over her shoulder and said, Oh yeah, and no more toilet crying, unless I'm around to help pull you out of your own head. Promise? Jinhwa gave a nod. I promise. Harpreet made a fist and pumped it in front of her with a sharp movement. It was a signal of resolve and encouragement. 加油, she said, using a loud whisper. Jinhwa exhaled a laugh and returned the movement, accompanying it with a strong nod. With that, Harpreet let the bathroom door close behind her, and with casual steps, made her way back to the old furniture store. As she walked, she thought to herself, I'm so good at this. I think I just got promoted from best friend to best friend first class. Chapter 40. For Science. I'm glad I have you, Harpreet. Thank you for being my friend. Jinhwa found herself looking at the bathroom door for a while after her best friend walked out. Harpreet had been the main reason she had not had a complete breakdown in the last few weeks. Since that day, I found out I was different. Her gaze turned to the wide bathroom mirror in front of her. The skin on her face was flushed, and she could hardly distinguish her brown eyes housed behind the swollen skin of her eyelids. Turning on the water, she cupped her hands and splashed her face to help revive herself. Wake up, wake up! A dreamlike state had characterized her reality in the weeks since that conversation with her father about who and what she was. Sometimes she felt as if she had fallen asleep, only to open her eyes to a new reality. Her former existence as Jinhua, the ace math and science student, an expert ripboarder, was a thing of the past. Now I'm Jinhua, half human, half computer, science experiment. She wanted to cry again just thinking about it. On the night her father told her about her true origins, he had given her a choice. Option A. She could go on living her life as she had been up to that point, ignorant, afraid, yet peaceful. Option B. She could become an active participant in the process, informed, engaged, and afraid. He told her that the decision was completely up to her, then reminded her that if she chose to be involved, his team would have more data to analyze, which would make it easier for them to draw conclusions about how her evolution could play out. Stay ignorant, unknowing, and afraid. Be informed, engaged, and afraid. I'm still afraid either way. That night, as she lay awake on her bed, a solid hour was all she needed to make her decision. She informed her father the next morning of her choice. His reaction was as she suspected, somewhat neutral, yet understanding. She knew him well enough to know he probably would have responded in the same way, no matter her choice. He just nodded his head and said, "All right then. I'll give you more details later tonight. Let's meet in the study around 1800. Then he left for work. She wanted to stop him before he exited the house to ask about the details, but paused before she opened her mouth. For him, the choice to have his daughter be ignorant of her own evolution or informed about it, both must have been undesirable options. Both would cause her to be afraid. Afraid from knowing too little or knowing too much. She knew he was aware of this. It had been a lose-lose situation for him, and Jinhua had no idea how to feel or how to talk with him about it. So she let him walk out the door and said nothing. From that evening on, her father's study, previously a restricted area, became open access. Jinhua spent many nights a week in the room. Sometimes it was just her and her father. He would show her some data about herself, explain it, and she would listen, occasionally asking questions if she understood enough about what he was talking about. On other evenings, some of his associates would show up. Most were geeks in white coats whose names, as hard as she would try, she could not recall. "Jinhua, this is Dr. So-and-so. She's a physician," her father would say. Another evening, it was Dr. What's-His-Face. He's a geneticist. Then there was Dr. Washington Perez something. He was handsome, Hispanic, with a firm handshake. He was also a digigenomic scientist. She could not remember the full name, though. Who hyphenates their name 4 times? I mean, come on. She began to make up names for them based on prominent features that she could easily remember. The physician became Dr. Pink Clipboard, the geneticist, Dr. Big Nose. The digigenomic scientist became Dr. Handsome Handshake. She hyphenated the name in his honor. This made it easier for her to at least distinguish between some of the researchers. Over the course of several weeks, these scientists conducted a battery of physical tests, psychological examinations, and other assessments on Jinhua. Some were obvious in their scope and objectives. During others, she had no clue what the real purpose was. She just showed up and tried her best to let the process play out. She was also comforted by the knowledge that at any moment she could walk away from it all, as she and her father had discussed. As a result of the tests, she knew more about specific aspects of her own body than she ever wanted to know. From knowing how much urine and other fluids her body produced daily, to specific images that materialize in her brain during certain sleep cycles, to even the density of her bones. She knew all that and then some. She had even finally deciphered the mysterious recurring dream of the broken computer. Her interface with the time-worn machine represented her search for her mother and her digital self, a side of her only known to her subconscious mind until a month prior. When she offered this hypothesized interpretation to her father's team of scientists, they simply nodded their heads and scratched notes on their clipboards. Dr. Pink Clipboard praised her insightfulness with an encouraging wink. It was as if she had a map to her entire being, inside and out. Some parts were easy to interpret and read, others baffled even the researchers. Despite the type of data recorded, everything about her was an open book, to be examined, cataloged, and studied. Jinhua went through ups and downs throughout the process. Sometimes she was infinitely fascinated by it all, wondering about how all the numbers and images might change in the future. Other periods filled her with anxiety. This typically occurred when neither the scientist nor her father had good answers or explanations to interpret something for her. These periods of silence occurred a few times a week. Anytime they happened, Jinhua found herself ready to explode with tears, anger, or both. On most occasions, she walked out of the study, then to her room to calm down. When she eventually returned, which she always did out of respect for their time, the tests and explanations would resume as if nothing had happened. As if they had known the emotional outburst was coming. This made Jinhua feel a little awkward, but no one said anything to her about it, so she didn't feel as bad about having interrupted their research. Throughout what felt like an endless line of interviews, tests, and evaluations, Jinhua reported nearly everything that she could think of to her dad's faithful team of researchers. It took patience to respond to similar questions being asked in slightly cryptic and skewed ways, to keep her mind spinning even after most of her energy had been consumed. But she endured. On occasion, she was rewarded with truncated explanations of the tests, and sometimes even a personal anecdote from her father. One such anecdote came from a review of a thought log entry when Jinhua was 11 years old. Her father told her she had been trying to teach herself about the trigonometric concept of the unit circle. Young Jinhua knew the concept was key to success in her math committee and devoted herself to learning it weeks ahead of the curriculum. But it was hard. She kept mixing up radians with degrees, kept going the wrong way on the circle. Her triangle dimensions were all off, and the concept of special right triangles seemed beyond her grasp. Lee had watched her frustration from his study, watched her try and fail over many nights. The thoughts were all there. If I just try it this way, no, that doesn't work. Ayo, I was so close. I'll never understand this. I'm such a failure. Jinhua scanned the log, recalling the frustration of the memory. Then halfway down the screen, the log changed. I think I'm getting the hang of this. Ooh, so that's where it goes. Okay, so counterclockwise is positive, clockwise is negative. So tricky. By the time she reached the end of the screen, tears were in her eyes. She looked at her dad. His eyes were wet, too. I was very proud that day. I knew you would figure it out, Lee said. Jinhua embraced him. They were alone in the study that day, and she was overjoyed to be able to share such a private moment with him without the eyes of the other scientists around. After weeks of tests and research, Jinhua noticed her father appeared to be losing weight, and outside of speaking to her about Cereus or digigenomics, seemed to have little else to say. The remainder of his thin gray hair was slowly shrinking into his scalp, and he often wore a look of shielded fatigue on his face. She knew there were things that he knew that he could not or would not tell her. Furthermore, he was frustrated by those facts that escaped even his superior understanding. He was also worried about how his only daughter could bear the burden of being viewed and treated like a test animal in a lab. Besides these two factors, she had no idea what personal demons he was fighting. Whatever it was that specifically troubled him, he would never tell her. And on some level, she was all right with that. Because she had secrets too. Something had changed within her since that fateful conversation with her father in the Cereus study. Fearing that she might skew the data, she never bothered to mention it to the army of interviewers and researchers that she interacted with. This change was not something that could be detected by analyzing the mountains of data her body generated on a daily basis. No. It was something completely different. More like a feeling she couldn't put words to, but knew was there. Just like my connection with Daniel. She had never been able to describe it, or this new feeling to the scientists, her father, or even to herself. But something was happening with her. It was like something deep inside of her had awoken and was slowly stretching its limbs, observing foreign surroundings with childlike curiosity. Now, after weeks of watching, it was ready to play. The creature, docile and wide-eyed, was like electric energy amassed at the positive end of a battery. Sparking with electric gold light, it lingered in confined space, growing stronger with each passing moment. Jinhua had no idea how, but she could feel it running through her, and the feeling was magical. When the feeling came over her, it began as a tiny golden vibration that reverberated through her. The energy was sometimes small and fragile. Other times it surprised her, disrupting the natural rhythm of her body's energy cycle, only to have homeostasis return moments later, leaving as quickly as it had appeared. Jinhua began to meticulously record in her device whenever she felt the wave, as she came to call it, pass through her. Several weeks ago, they were rare occurrences, but through all the tests, experiments, and procedures, their frequency and intensity increased. What is happening to me? As she looked at herself in the bathroom mirror, she felt it again. This one shot a powerful Mikado yellow wave of energy from somewhere within her brain to her left lung. Her heart's rhythm was interrupted briefly as she gasped for air, coughing violently. Her hands gripped the sink, eyes clenched shut. She desperately waited for the sensation to pass, wondering if she was having a heart attack or stroke. The world around her felt as if it was shaking, on the verge of collapse. Jinhua wanted to scream, but even her voice would not come. It had been absorbed by the wave. A minute later, after the sensation passed, she opened her eyes. Her reflection returned its gaze from the mirror. Her sweat-glistened face, stained with the marks of sadness, looked tense and tight. She raised her hands to gently massage it, then splashed more water on her face from the sink. Still somewhat breathless, skin tingling with the after effects of the unexplained power, Jinhua pulled her device from her shorts to document the event. It had been the third wave that day, and the most powerful that she had ever felt up until that point in time.
Chapter 41. 2 Directives. I sense what Jinhua calls the wave. How long has she been gone from the committee room? I am here, but she is not. She was... where? Yes. In the women's bathroom, east side of the community center. The site of the former Yuba Sutter Mall. Opened 1990. Located in the county of... irrelevant. Jinhua. She is distressed. Vitals, blood pressure, heart rate, muscle tension is all elevated. Take action. But how? Which is best? Best for me. Best for Jinhua. Communicate with her? She does not desire it now. Does not like to talk about this. Doesn't know how. She is in the bathroom, crying. She is stressed and confused. All vitals confirm this. Then what is the best way to accomplish Directive 1? Directive 1. Directive 1. Directive 1. Contact. Touch. But she does not desire it now. Doesn't want it. It scares her. It is not Fei Hao. Being here, listening to the fat man, Master Scholar Rhodes, helps Directive 1. But it is not efficient. I am learning. I'm improving. But it does not help her. Doesn't help her. Directive 2 is compromised. She was happy when? By the river. When we almost kissed. When? Racing ripboards with her friend, Harpreet. Yes, the one with the wide hips and loud voice. She returned to the room now. Her face has signs of tension. The body language, crossed arms, tight lips, narrowed eyes, displays anxiety. She is stressed, worried about her friend, Jinhua. She is a good friend. Something is happening. Jinhua is not well. She is coughing, feeling tightness in her chest. It is hard to breathe. There is blood on the sink. She is scared, confused. The world is different than before. But she does not understand it. Her fingers are holding on to the sink now. Tight, gripping. She doesn't want to fall. I should help. Directive 1 is in danger. No, she doesn't want it. Directive 2 is compromised. Her vision is cloudy. She may lose consciousness soon. May pass out. Better. Jinhua is dizzy, but it is different. She is not afraid. I can sense it. I know. She can feel me, but she doesn't know how to proceed. I can sense her. She wants to learn how, wants to do it herself. It is very her. Directive 1. Directive 1. Yes. Good. Fei Hao. She is standing in the storm, listening, feeling, waiting. She is learning how it moves. I cannot help her, but she is not alone. I am with her. She knows it. I can help her from here, make her stronger. Vitals are calming. She is adapting, learning to listen, learning to feel again, learning to sense. Wait. The unpleasant sensations return. The coughing, tight chest, blurred vision, strained muscles, the blood. She wants to scream. Directive 1 is compromised. I must go. Must help. No. Directive 2 compromised. Wait. She is on the floor of the bathroom, feeling weak, but vitals are strong. Something is happening. Something is changing. I cannot see her now. Lost. Where did she go? Directive 1 is compromised. Directive 2 is compromised. The fat man is talking. He can wait. Directive 1 and Directive 2 will be compromised. I must go. Must help Jinhua. 10 minutes. Wait. 15 minutes. Wait. She has not returned. Where is Jinhua? There. She is walking in. Now sitting at her desk. She looks happy. Something has changed. Something is different. I will ask her after the fat man is done. She is smiling at me. I took the right action. I must remember what made her happy for the future. Today is important for her. We'll save it for the future. Jinhua is better. She is happy. Directive 1 and 2 satisfied. Fei Hao. Chapter 42 Road Trip Part 1. Noe hated road trips. One of her earliest memories was of a trip she had taken with her family to Las Vegas when she was 6 years old. Squashed in the back of an orange-colored Ford Fiesta, a rental car, next to her parents' luggage, she recalled looking out at the endless desert scene passing by outside and being terribly bored. The only thing she had with her was an old tablet. The screen was going out, and there was no Wi-Fi access on the open road, which meant she was stuck watching old episodes of SpongeBob SquarePants she had already watched several times before, because it was the only show loaded onto the device. In the front seat, her dad was at the wheel, quiet as usual. Her mom sat next to him, talking endlessly about things Noe couldn't understand. During that trip, Noe resembled a fly on the wall, hardly noticeable, but a nuisance whenever she made her presence known. All of these factors made the experience uncomfortable for her. And for the rest of her life, she avoided long journeys by car whenever possible. The trip from Sacramento to Yuba City was not far, according to Google Maps, but traffic along the small highway nearly doubled the commute time on the worst days, and today was one of those days. I hate being in the car, Noe thought. She labored to transform her genuine discomfort by tapping her foot rapidly. The action helped dispel some of her restless energy. It was a sweltering mid-August day, with no clouds to block the midday sun. Fields of yellowed grass were situated between the clutter of suburban clone houses that characterized the uninspired neighborhoods along the highway. When she was a child, Noe's mother told her that long ago there had been nothing but empty fields between Sacramento and Yuba City. Much of it was farmland for growing various California-made crops. But over the years, life was slowly squeezed from the farmers, and they were forced to sell to private corporations. These companies turned the land into houses, schools, and other niceties that American families always expected, but never appreciated. More capitalistic greed was how her mother had put it. Noe had a hard time imagining the fields empty. She could not see life without the steady march of progress. Rodin sat by the opposite window in the back seat of the car. They hadn't spoken much at all, mostly because he had been furiously making calls and answering messages the entire time. Noe's eyes shifted back inside the car toward him. He was dressed in a navy blue polo shirt, with the Cereus crest located over his heart. His pants were plain khakis, that looked faded and stressed over his thick legs. Noe assumed he had bought them when he was a much thinner man. Rodan wasn't moving, but his face was tight with concentration. Despite the chilly air-conditioned interior of the luxury vehicle, dots of sweat collected just below his tightly aligned haircut. The man was clearly engaged in an important telepathic conversation, and she didn't want to disturb him. Noe had learned about telepathic technology when she was a little girl, and had always considered it a form of communication for the privileged elite and government spies, just like it had been portrayed in the movies and other popular media. Bunch of pretentious assholes, she would often think, whenever she saw someone's face writhing for no apparent reason, their eyes moving as if they were in face-to-face conversation with another person. After all, those were the only people that could afford such expensive toys and were too good to use normal voice communication like regular people. Besides that, she never liked the ideal of willfully broadcasting her private thoughts over a public network. You never knew who was on the other end listening. A moment later, Rodan seemed to relax, signaling the end of his conversation. He flung his head back on the headrest in exasperation and shut his eyes. "Everything okay?" Noe asked. A sigh blew heavily out of his lips. "I just spoke with Lee. He says we lost another 100 people from one of the convils down south. They just packed up and left overnight." "Wow," Noe replied. She sounded surprised, but didn't show it on her face. "They finally woke the fuck up and moved back to normal life." Rodan seemed too distracted to notice the contrast between her tone and her unexpressive face. He continued, "Up there in Yuba City, it's not much better. They're bleeding dozens more by the day. They must be getting scared and losing faith in the system," Noe said. "About time." Rodan nodded grimly. "You're right. Everybody heard about what went down up in that ghost town, and they fear Limnic may strike again at any time and anywhere." "That may be the case," Noe mused. "It may also be that they finally saw Cereus for the scam that it truly is, and decided to join normal society again." She let the thoughts pass, feeling the coals of anger being stoked into ignition. Then she stopped herself by taking deep, regular breaths. She was getting better at calming herself before her anger began to burn. It was easier to prevent the fire than to extinguish it after it was blazing out of control. Though Noe disliked Cereus, she cared for Rodan. Sometimes it was hard to keep the two separate in her head. Janus. Her line of thinking suddenly redirected itself to their shared nemesis. It had been 2 weeks since the Battle of North Bloomfield, yet Noe continued to replay the encounter with her mother's murderer in her mind. His sinister grin, the mental block, the feeling of floating in the womb, her losing consciousness. There were still many questions she had no answers to. Why didn't Kyler and Spacer kill him? Why didn't I kill him? What type of power does Janus have over us? How can we fight it? Noah's mind began to twist itself into knots. She had no idea how or where to find answers to these questions. She spent the last 2 weeks scouring online resources for answers, yet found nothing. It frustrated her immensely. We failed. I failed. This is all happening because of us. She began to go over the events following Janus's appearance again, as she had every day since the battle. It was the young Spazer who had awoken her from the deep sleep she had fallen into. At first, all she felt was her body being pushed back and forth. Initially, the contact was barely discernible, but quickly, it turned into violent shaking. Like a teenager being roused from sleep by an annoyed parent, Noe's first thought was to continue sleeping, but something told her to wake up. Then it yelled at her to wake up. When she opened her eyes, they still felt leaden and slow. It took her vision a few seconds to link up with her brain and process everything that was going on. How long was I? Her thought was interrupted by the young soldier. We can't stay here, Spazer yelled. The building's gonna fall. Building and fall were the only words that registered in her head. They were the only words she needed to hear. Without a second thought, she clambered to her feet with Spazer and Kyler's help. Then all three of them scrambled out of the building. Seconds after her brain took note of the cool evening air, Noe heard the sound of splintering wood, then a loud crash as the roof gave way, crushing everything beneath it. The old house released a hot sigh as it collapsed, causing a billow of heat to blow across her face. Noe instinctively raised her arm to shield her nose and mouth from debris and ash scattered by the dying structure. She was lucky to be alive. They all were. The three of them walked back toward the entrance of the town, eventually crossing paths with the sweaty and bloody bear. Kyler immediately began an accountability assessment for the remainder of his unit, human and mech, while Spazer helped the battle-weary bear tend to his wounds. Out of nowhere, Cheeks joined the group, enthusiastic at first when speaking about how many kills he had during the fight. But upon hearing about Lance's death, his smile shrank, and he became silent, withdrawn. For Noe, it was a scary sight. She had only known him to be jovial and light-hearted. Melancholy did not suit his face, not at all. When she reached the entrance to the town, Rodan stood there, an empty expression on his face. He just stared ahead in puzzlement, saying nothing. At first, she thought it was the horror of the battle that had gotten to him, that he was in a state of what they used to call shell shock. Then, she realized it might be something else. Something that he wouldn't tell her. Call it women's intuition, but she just knew then and there that he had seen or heard something that had changed him in a fundamental way. And as she searched his eyes among the destruction of the battlefield, she knew that she would never know what that thing was. Much like her experience with the U.S. Air Force operator that nearly drove her to suicide all those years ago, the thing or event was profoundly personal for him, and there was nothing she could do or say to help him process and move forward from it. It was his private war to fight, his demon to exorcise. All she could do was provide support with invisible hands, and hope that would be enough to guide him to where he needed to be. Chapter 43, Road Trip, Part 2. Rodan was stressed. Too much to do, too much to think about. In the back of the autocar, he stretched his neck from side to side to relieve some tension. It was the only part of his body that he could move freely in the constricted space of the back seat. His neck popped and cracked as he moved it gently back and forth. Then he shut his eyes and leaned his head back on the headrest. The position was relaxing until a pulsing headache, brought on by the vehicle's vibration, forced him to lower his neck again. Can't get fucking comfortable. Story of my life. You alright? Noah asked. She looked concerned. Yeah, I'm good. Rodan shook his head, then let out a sigh. I just got a lot going on. I bet. It's probably high-level serious business, right? An unexpected laugh escaped Rodan's lips. Wow. That joke. I'm not even going to comment on how terrible it was. Noe grinned. I know, it was bad. It was the best I could come up with on the spot. I've never been good at being witty or cracking jokes. Guess the military forgot to issue me a sense of humor. Rodan smiled. I'm right there with you. There was a guy in my unit back in the army. I think his name was Zach. Anyway, anytime we were out on a training run or going through some other type of hell, he would crack jokes. There were variations of knock-knock jokes, or if our drill instructor wasn't around, yo mama jokes. Those were the best. Rodan snickered, recalling the memory with fondness. Noe laughed, showing her teeth. She imagined a much younger and thinner Rodan, laughing at yo mama jokes and running. No way. You? Running? I don't see it. Rodan's eyes fell to his bulging stomach as a grin formed on his lips. I see you got jokes. Yeah, I used to, but only when I had to. I never liked it though. The military tries to turn everyone into a runner. But those of us who never liked it end up hating it even more. Then we look like this after we get out. He slapped his stomach to further prove his point. The action made Noe laugh again. To him, her laugh was like the sound of a soulful saxophone drifting out of a jazz club on a clear evening. A pleasant surprise whenever it occurred. It helped him relax, made him want to stop and listen for a while. And what he felt was a split second. Rodan's eyes scanned the entirety of Noah's figure. Her feet were in white, simple sandals. She wore capris that matched the color of her footwear, revealing tanned ankles. Her ribbed tank top was a deep purple. She had a style that was her own. Casual, yet fashionable, but wasn't flashy about it at all. Rodan liked that about her, among many other things. Sexy was the word that came to his mind. By the time the split second expired, his eyes snapped forward again, with the image of her body's curves and dips burned into his head. An image he would not soon forget. You, see something you like? Noe asked. Her tone was somewhat playful, but her expression was academic and anticipative, like that of a teacher asking a student an unforeseen question. Rodan's breath caught. His pucker factor shot to an 11 out of 10, as if he were about to parachute out of a C-130. She's on me? Ah, hell. I was gonna say... He cleared his throat, stalling to find words. Any words? Noi blinked rapidly, with expectant eyes. You were gonna say, I'm listening. Well, I was gonna say how you seem to have avoided growing a belly since you got out. Not everyone could do that. A single bead of sweat fell down his forehead. He wondered how she would react to his response. Can't believe I got caught. Story of my life. I run a lot, and I eat as clean as I can. Noi smirked. Can't imagine having a belly like this. She reached over and lightly patted his stomach. I don't think it would be a good look on me. What do you think? Nah, it sure wouldn't be, Rodan said, somewhat absent-mindedly. Her touch sent pleasant waves throughout his abdomen, which spread rapidly through the rest of his body. His jaw tightened, and his breathing stuttered. He had to readjust himself in the small seat to curb his rising excitement, while averting his eyes to the mundane air vent below him. He was relieved when she returned to her side of the vehicle. Leaning against the window, she gave a voice command to increase the power of the air conditioner in the already cold vehicle, then folded her arms across her chest. Interesting, Rodan thought. Another minute passed with only the faint sound of traffic outside of the vehicle to fill both of their ears. Noi turned to Rodan abruptly and asked, Why did you join Cereus? Rodan, relieved she had asked a question he didn't mind answering, chuckled in response. Well, I kinda got this wannabe hero complex thing going on. I don't know. Ever since I was in high school, I wanted to help people, and society in general. So, after I graduated from high school, I joined the army. Noi nodded. His story didn't sound much different from her own. I was the same. Went to the Space Force boot camp almost directly after graduation. Noi breathed a single dry laugh. My mom was pissed. She wanted me to stay at home here in SAC and join Cereus. I said no thanks to that. Rodan looked at her with surprise. Wait, what is it? Do I have something on my face? Noi asked, slightly self-conscious. Nah. I just didn't know you were from here. Yep, Del Paso Heights proud. Noi paused, mirroring his astonishment. Wait, you are too? Hell yeah, I am. Graduated from Grant Union. Class of 39, feeling fine. I used to patrol the Heights as a young cop. Noi lightly punched him in the shoulder from her seat. No way! I'm Grant, class of 47. I don't remember the little slogan or whatever. I never paid attention to that shit. Then she added, Oh, so you were a cop, huh? Glad I never ran into you back in the day then. Both laughed, wiping tears from their eyes. Then suddenly, Noi remembered the morning Rodan showed up at her apartment to deliver the news about her mother. The needle prick of nostalgia she had felt back then, that fleeting familiarity, was because of Rodan. She hadn't seen him on the streets as a kid, but she had encountered him before. As Rodan checked his device again for another incoming message, in the seat across from her in the back of the autocar, she studied his face. The maple syrup-shaded eyes still reflected that of a relentless public servant. Those were the same eyes of that handsome police rookie in that clean uniform during the year of the 2045 flood. Among the dozens of teenagers Rodan aided during the flood relief, he most likely didn't remember her, but she remembered him. The compassionate gaze made her soften with comfort in their seat, as if she were nestled before a space heater in the wintertime. A pleasant sensation. For the next several minutes, both sat in silence, each guessing what the other was thinking, enjoying the game. Outside, traffic had slowed to a crawl, and the world moved by 1 inch at a time. There was nowhere to go, no way to neutralize the feelings swirling around them. Rodan felt compelled to act, but had no idea how he would go about it. I shouldn't get involved with her. Got too many things to do. He recalled the burned image of her again and swallowed hard. But damn, she is sexy as hell. A phone call invaded the noiseless car. In haste, Rodan scrambled to clear his mind of lustful contemplations and refocus on his work. Without looking at who was calling, he answered his device with swift motion. Hello? Oh shit, when did that happen? I see. How many dead? Damn, that many? Uh-huh. We're about 20 minutes out now. The traffic is horrible. Uh-huh. Yeah, she's with me. He glanced over at Noe, who was listening intently to his half of the conversation. Dinner? Yeah, you know I like to eat. Noe suppressed a laugh. Rodan mouthed, "Shut up," in her direction. Oh, okay. I've eaten that a few times before and thought it was pretty good. Yeah, I know. You like that spicy shit. Okay. See you in a little bit. Rodan ended the call. What was that? Noe asked. It was Lee. He said another Limnic cell just conducted a live demolition down in San Diego of a new hospital building that was under construction. Noe gasped. Damn it. How many fatalities? Initial reports say 30 or so construction workers and contractors were on site at the time of the blast. They're still searching the debris for potential survivors. Rodan brought his large hand to his forehead and wrinkled the skin. It looks like Limnic's been emboldened since our fight with them. What about the Cereus militias? Can't they track down the bombers? Rodan shook his head. The terrorists covered their digital and physical tracks well. It may take days to figure out what really happened. Besides, we can never take them in direct combat. The few volunteer defense units in each Comville are no match for Limnic's well-paid army of mercenaries. And many of our units on the fringes have been bought and bribed by old world money. The US feds are getting involved to slow Limnic down, but their general anti-Cereus and Limnic stance keeps them from going all in. They don't like acknowledging that either of us exist. Goes against their well-crafted narrative of being the best on Earth, you know? Goddamn politics. His fist banged into the car door, shaking the small vehicle. Noe reached over and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. It was the only thing that felt appropriate to do. The complexities of his reality as head of Cereus were far too difficult for her to grasp. The hardness of Rodan's face slackened upon Noe's touch. He had noticed a change in her since she agreed to work with him as a contractor. The confused and cynical woman that he had encountered for the first time in West Sacramento months ago seemed to have found a tender side that showed itself more and more easily. He was happy for her, and found himself fighting down his desire for companionship from his lonely position as the head of such a monumental organization. He reminded himself again not to go there. Instead, he found himself thinking about a question she asked him a week before the Battle of North Bloomfield. What's going to happen with Cereus? His unspoken response always wavered between blind optimism and dark nihilism. There was no middle ground for him, because he had no idea what awaited him or the organization in the long run. He, Noe, and the rest of Kyler's team had discussed the events from the battle and the encounter with Janus at length, but they had not reached a definitive conclusion about what really happened that night. They were like doctors, talking about the visible symptoms the patient was experiencing, but had no idea how to discuss the effect those same symptoms had on his psyche or soul. None of them knew how to talk about it. The facts were always easier to discuss. At least it was that way for Rodan. Everything else existed in some esoteric realm, out of reach from his formulaic understanding of the world. But he did know a few things to be certain. Janus could read minds. Furthermore, it was clear that he had found some way to manipulate people's thoughts, and to exert a powerful force that made them do whatever he wanted. How had Noe described it? It was like I was locked out of my own mind, she told Rodan during the debrief. Could Janus have manipulated him without his knowledge? Surely it was possible. But Rodan hadn't felt any of the feelings Noe or the others had described. How would he have known if Janus had controlled all of his actions or not? Had Janus even really been there that night? Or had it all been some made-up illusion Janus projected into his head? All of the questions tumbled around Rodan's pressured mind and confused him even more. Bottom line is, if Janus can lock us out of our own heads and control what we see and do, then we're in a lot of trouble. Hey. No one nudged him with their finger. We're here in town, but things seem a little off. Rodan had been so in his head, he hadn't noticed Yuba City come into view. They were on Calusa Highway, cruising down the city's primary artery that ran from west to east. Looking outside of the window, Rodan saw what she meant. People were huddled into small groups in front of businesses, shops, and community shelters, with heads low in conspiratorial postures. From the relative low speed of the car, he could discern the rapid movement of lips accompanied by sharp gestures from several pedestrians. Citizens who had not grouped up moved with urgency in tightened balls of tension. Some walked with friends and family members to unknown destinations, while others jogged. What the hell is going on out there? Noe leaned toward his side of the window for a better view. It looks like something is happening, or is about to happen. Rodan held his gaze outside of the window, trying to interpret the scene. No immediate explanations came to him. This made the ominous feeling in his mind feel even worse. I have no idea. It's a good thing we're almost there. It must be Janus somehow. He's doing this. I know it. But what is his plan? He hadn't told anyone about his conversation with Janus following the battle. Not even Noe. He knew he could trust her, that having a second head to think through the situation, especially hers, would be helpful. Yet he couldn't bring himself to do it. What would she think? How would she take it if she knew I didn't try and kill Janus when I had the chance? That I thought about helping him? Surely she would see it as an act of betrayal. He had no one else he could turn to at this point, and couldn't bring himself to sabotage their friendship. He would have to handle this on his own, without her help. What had Janus told him? Cereus is the future, and you alone have the power to make it a reality. Only you can help usher humanity toward a new age. The words had haunted him since that day, and he was not sure about how to interpret them. So they sat on the kitchen counter of his brain, like mail delivered to the wrong address, unanalyzed, ignored. Would humanity adopt Cereus's principles and philosophy on its own? Could Cereus society truly survive in its transformed nature without the leadership and guidance of the founders? Was Janus's technology the only way to force humanity to take the next bold step into the future? Rodan had no clear answers to any of these questions, and that left him unsettled. He had always wanted to help humanity, to be more of a contributor than a consumer, and joining Cereus had been an outlet for that desire. Now, he was in a position to steer the organization, and even humanity as a whole, toward that greater good. Sometimes, the burden of that responsibility became too much for him to bear. Another gentle nudge from nowhere brought him back to reality. She could tell when his mind was preoccupied. "Hey, we're here," she said. Her voice was warm and relaxed, a noticeable contrast from their first meeting, which felt like a distant memory at this point. "Did you get all of your thinking done?" He smiled. "Only partially. I still got a lot left to do." It had been a few months since Rodan had stepped foot in Li Ma's fabulous house. The large apartment that Rodan himself now occupied in the capital since his divorce was a closet compared to the 6+ bedrooms that his longtime friend called home. In typical Li fashion, he stood with perfectly aligned posture at the geometric midpoint between two pairs of pillars that framed the decoratively carved wood of his mansion's front entrance. Beside him stood a straight-faced young woman, wearing faded gray jean shorts and a yellow t-shirt with basic math symbols printed on the front. It took him several seconds to realize that it was Li's only daughter, Jinhua, who now was just a little bit taller than her elderly father. She had grown significantly since he had last seen her. "What took you so long?" Li said. The words came out slower than Rodan was used to, as the two men lightly embraced. He could tell Li looked more worn out than usual. The standard traffic delays. Too many people setting their vehicles on Do Not Disturb mode makes everything slower." "It only takes me an hour to get here from the city, so I guess I've got you beat on time," Li joked. Rodan gave a curt acknowledgement. "Whoa, is that little Jenny?" His eyes turned to Jinhua. "I barely recognized you. You grow so much." "Hello, Mr. Mitchell. It's good to see you again." She forced a smile and extended her hand for a formal handshake. Rodan returned it. There was a new fortitude in the strength of her grip. Her eyes had adopted an air of experience, very similar to her father's. "I see you've had your growth spurt, and you've passed your father in height. Although, that's not really that hard to do." Jinhua covered her mouth to hide a giggle. Li shook his head, grinning. The sound of a small suitcase stumbling on the winding pavement made Rodan turn around. Noe's old suitcase seemed to meander of its own will as she struggled to pull it along. The wheels wobbled and flailed, squeaking with every rotation. Rodan made a move to help her with the uncooperative luggage, but the sharp daggers that pierced him from her eyes told him to stay put, and let her handle it. Rodan gestured toward her. Lee, this is Noelani Acosta. She's the one that's been helping us out against Limnic in the last few weeks. Hi, I go by Noe. She extended her hand. Lee took calculated steps forward to return the handshake. It's a pleasure to meet you, Noe. Rodan's informed me of your courage and bravery on the digital and physical battlefields. We need all of the help we can get right now. So it's much needed and appreciated. I'm just doing my job. Limnic and Janus must be stopped. She thought about adding, and Cereus too, but she realized that this would probably not go over well with them. Agreed, Lee added. Shall we go inside? I'll show you where you'll be lodging. Chapter 44. Dinner Party. You didn't have to arrange dinner for us, Rodan said. Lee shook his head. It's no trouble at all. It's been a long time since we were all together like this. These are hard times, so we should enjoy it while we can. A decorative chandelier with LED bulbs, crafted to look like tiny candle flames, illuminated the dining room in formal light. The lighting always made Rodan feel as if he were in a museum. On the walls, Lee displayed blown-up photos of locations around the world he had visited throughout his extensive career. Lee and Rodan were in some of the pictures. Others just contained beautiful landscapes and scenery. One picture of sunset in Singapore, with the iconic Marina Bay Sands Hotel silhouetted before a sky of burning colors, could have won a prize. Lee was a talented photographer, even though he never openly talked about the hobby. Rodan felt tempted to skip the meal and admire his friend's work anytime he visited. Come on in, Kyler, Lee called. The old soldier marched into the room, followed by two of his men. They entered from the house's comfortable great room, where they had been waiting for the past 20 minutes. Cheeks entered the formal atmosphere cautiously, as if he were afraid to touch or disturb anything. Spazer walked in with a limp, his fresh wound from the battle still healing. Unlike Cheeks, he seemed much more used to the vibe of the room. Yet, even in civilian clothes, he stood with hands, one over the other, neatly folded in front of him with formal posture, as if ready to receive orders. Kyler greeted everyone with a stone-faced nod and took his place toward the far end of the table next to Noe. Cheeks' eyes found Noe's. Before making his way to an empty chair next to Rodan, he waved fat fingers playfully toward her. Noe shook her head and laughed softly. Spazer smiled too, until Cheeks flashed a dirty look and pointed his finger directly at the vacant chair next to him. Spazer gave Noe a timid wave, then limped as fast as he could to his seat. Lee sat at the head of the finely crafted dining room table. Rodan was directly to his left, with eyes and thoughts lost in the memory of a picture of himself and Lee standing in Prague. On the other side of the table, to Lee's right, Jinhua sat with an unfailing posture, hungry eyes fixed toward the center of the table. Next to her, Noe noticed the smell of the food seemed to soften the adolescent's face. It made her look more like a normal teenage girl, rather than the daughter of an intelligence agent. With some effort, Lee raised himself from his chair, then lifted a glass of dark wine to perform a toast to his dinner guests. I'm pleased that we could all get together like this tonight. As you know, we have all gathered here to formulate our next steps to counter Janus and his plans. I was inspired by all of your bravery and courage during the battle up north. But we still have much to do in our fight against Limnic. With that said, I hope that tonight we can put all of that aside for a little while and enjoy a good meal and each other's company. So, let's eat. Cheers! Everyone at the table took a sip of wine. Then the dinner began. Lee lowered himself into his chair. Good speech, Rodan remarked. Thanks. Low conversations began among the dinner guests as everyone picked up utensils to begin the meal. The sound of sliding dishes, friendly chit-chat, and Cheeks' voice all worked in tandem to contribute to a family atmosphere. Noe had no idea what she was eating. Before her sat 2 large pots filled with a bubbling liquid. Each pot was partitioned in the center by a metallic divider, separating one soup base from the other, giving the entire meal a Jekyll and Hyde appearance. On one side, the soup had a yellowish gold hue, with swirls of something Lee called miso in it. The other bubbled with a reddish color and smelled strongly of pepper and salt. It looked unbelievably spicy, and Noe feared it might cause pain upon entering and exiting her body. Jinhua passed her a plate of raw ingredients that she initially had no idea what to do with. There were some type of leafy greens, mushrooms, thin slices of what appeared to be beef, and other assorted food items. Her eyes roamed around the table and noticed everyone else seemed to be stuffing the uncooked food into the miniature cauldron's rolling boils. So she followed their example, being careful to avoid contact with the hot metallic cooking pots. Everybody dig in, came Lee's voice across the dining table. Don't be shy. He began to shovel copious amounts of leafy greens into one of the smoking pots. Jinhua was about to load a fish ball wrapped in a thinly sliced piece of lamb into the pot when she noticed Noe fumbling with her pair of chopsticks. When Noe's third attempt to grab a helping of dried noodles failed, Jinhua reached over to assist her. You've never had a hot pot meal before, no? She asked innocently. How could you tell? Noe quipped. I used to use chopsticks a lot when I was a kid, but I always struggled with them. So eventually, I gave up completely and stuck with using a fork and knife. The last time I attempted to use them was when I was in high school, so a long time ago. Jinhua giggled. It's okay. I know there can be a learning curve if you don't use them a lot. She adeptly gripped the noodles and placed them in the boiling pot. Other ingredients, thin stringy mushrooms, tiny blocks called sponge tofu, and meat-stuffed fish balls followed. Jinhua maneuvered the red sticks between her fingers as if they were an organic appendage. Okay, now I'm impressed, Noe said. Her tongue began to salivate at the pleasant aroma of the cooking soup. So, nothing is made ahead of time except for the soup broth, and you have to put raw meat and everything else into the pot yourself? Yep, part of the fun is getting to make your own meal and doing it together with the people you care about. Well, where I'm from, if the food's not cooked all the way, we go and order takeout. Jinhua stirred the ingredients and smiled. I guess we have to take out the stuff from the pot to eat it after it's done. Does that count? Noe laughed awkwardly at her joke, reminding herself that despite her often mature veneer, She was still a teenager after all. So, you're probably in high school now, right? What do you plan on studying when you go to college? Jinhua returned a bewildered look. High school? College? These were words that she only knew through online media, really old movies, and television shows. The words brought images of old buildings and people to her mind, but the concept was difficult to grasp. Lee raised an eyebrow upon hearing the question. Our education system here in the Comville is organized a little differently. Jinhua proceeded to enlighten her on the nature of committees that allowed any person to gain knowledge and skills in a particular field. Those skills could then be evaluated and tested by a professional committee who could confer credentials to anyone who possessed the correct prerequisites and could perform tasks related to the actual nature of what the specific demands of the job were. In that way, it was easier for people to reskill themselves for certain work anytime they desired. She summarized this information for Noe, who listened intently. In short, no, I won't be going to college. I was going to look for an astronautical engineering committee after I complete the physics, advanced math, and quantum studies requirements. But lately I've been getting interested in biology and a new field called digigenomics. So I don't really know for sure at this point. Jinhua gave her a sweet smile. More dumplings? No thanks. Digigenomics? What the hell is that? Noe stared dumbly at the girl and watched her loudly slurping her soup, while her father looked at her approvingly without her knowledge. Noe felt a stab of inferiority begin to morph itself into anger, but it had little to do with Jinhua. She had heard a similar explanation of the Cereus educational system a long time ago as a 5th grader. Even back then, her mother preached about the benefits of the system, but ultimately allowed a 10-year-old Noe to choose her educational fate. It should have been a difficult decision for a little girl, but that was not the case for her. By the age of 10, her hate for Cereus and everything it stood for was already taking root, like a mushroom sprouting in a dark corner. She didn't care if the new system was superior. Noe chose the standard American public school system and never looked back. Damn you, Mom. The steam from the spicy brew before her encouraged heat and moisture to build in her eyes. More noodles? Jinhua said to her. She seemed aloof to the damage her words had caused. Noe looked at her for a second, then shook off her bitter thoughts. Jinhua's elevated mood acted as a salve for her wounded feelings. Of course. Noe forced herself to smile and accept the offer of more delicious food. Chapter 45. After Party. Across the table from Noe, Rodan tore his attention from the raucous cheeks every few minutes to check on her. Every now and then, her eyes met his, causing a delightful tingling feeling to move through his body. The sensation provided the perfect distraction from Cheeks' jabbering lips. You know, the 49ers can do it again this year. They got that new cyborg kid now. What's his name? Oh yeah, Silva. Darnell Silva. He's the quarterback now. He loudly slurped up some noodles. Then, with surprising technique, manipulated the chopsticks over the rolling broth to find his next helping. Dude literally has a fucking cannon for an arm. Had it approved by the league and everything. He can shoot the ball from end zone to end zone. Crazy shit. Rodan agreed. Yeah, Silva is a beast. It's unreal what some of these athletes can do now. It used to be that the only thing people worried about was doping and steroids. Now they say, if you ain't cheating, you ain't competing. Cheeks said it in unison with him, with a voice slightly above dinner party level. Kyler cast a regulatory look in his direction, reminding him to lower his voice. Spazer noted the gesture and began to snicker. In response, Cheeks used his bloated hand to slap him on the back of the head, causing his smile to quickly disappear. Kyler's glare fell on both of them as a final warning. Both lowered their heads and continued to eat, as soundlessly as the meal would allow. Noe shifted uncomfortably in her seat after observing the interaction between Kyler and his two flunkies. Cheeks and Spazer, despite their rough exterior, endeared her, especially after the way they had looked after her during the battle. Kyler had done the same, but she could not shake the general unease she felt around him. She had heard rumors of his questionable deeds over the years as one of Cereus's primary lapdogs from her mother. Anytime his alias, the Terminator, was used, things just seemed to appear or disappear. As far as she knew, her mother had never questioned his methods or moral leanings. He was a top-notch soldier and commander, but he was also a specter who only appeared before or after a catastrophe. This duality caused her confusion, and she feared his darker side, especially the way he could mask it behind military decorum. Although he had occasionally looked her way as he lapped up his soup, she had no desire to speak with him outside of a combat situation. On the other side of her, Jinhua leaned forward at a hard angle toward her father. Her lips moved rapidly, and she looked as if she had eaten something very spicy, red-faced and on the verge of tears. Lee sat in a slumped position, eyes exhausted, with a neutral expression on his face. A twitch in his eyebrow signaled to Noe that he was fighting a primal urge to get angry and was losing the battle. She knew that struggle well. Between the arguing father-daughter duo, the dodgy Kyler, and warm soup in her belly, she found herself feeling suddenly exhausted, looking for any reason to excuse herself from the meal. All of a sudden, Jinhua pushed her chair back with a quick motion, stood, then stormed out of the room. The lively atmosphere of the dinner was suddenly replaced by dead noise as all eyes turned to Lee, waiting for a response. The only sound in the room was the bubbling of leftover soup in the pots. "Please, continue to eat," Lee said with an old voice. With sluggish movement, he stood from the chair and exited the dining room, in the same direction of his daughter. A beat of awkwardness engulfed the occupants of the table. Without their host, they felt like a ship adrift, without a captain. One by one, they exchanged confused glances, each deciding what they should do next. Kyler was the first to break the silence and stand up. "We'll be leaving now," he said. "Tomorrow, we'll return for the meeting. See you then." He took one last glance toward the seat at the head of the table that Lee had occupied, shook his head, then motioned his two men to follow. Spazer dabbed his lips with a napkin, then stood. Cheeks' stomach scraped against the table as he raised himself up from his chair. The contact caused a full glass of wine to slosh, spilling a small amount on the decorative red tablecloth. He played it off as if some unknown force had caused the wine to spill, gave Noe a quick parting hand signal, and squeezed himself out of the room. Spazer attempted to give a ceremonious bow before leaving, but Cheeks shoved him toward the entrance to the great room, muttering something about him being uppity under his breath. Rodan and Noe surveyed the empty table. What had looked like an appetizing meal at a fancy Asian restaurant just an hour prior now resembled an organic garbage heap. Stains from splashed soup surrounded by falling ingredients, cooked and uncooked, sat next to cold spoons and dripping chopsticks. Vacant chairs formed odd angles between the massive table and walls, signaling the rapid breakup of the once festive mood. Noe and Rodan were the last ones at the table. She studied his face. He looked even more drained than when they initially met outside of her apartment to deliver the news about her mother. I'd probably look the same to him, she thought grimly. Across from her, Rodan's gaze locked onto hers. He wondered how she was faring with all of this. Out of her element, and still grieving the loss of her mother, he knew that she was doing her best to keep up with everything and adapt. Words that he should say to comfort her came to his mind, but his lips would not make them. He focused on action instead, wiping his lips with a napkin, then standing to go. I'm gonna go to bed. You should get some sleep too. Probably gonna be a long day tomorrow. He paused. I wonder what she's thinking. She nodded, pushing her own chair back to stand. Good call. She began to feel a small panic from the lack of words and motion between them. Why won't he say anything? The moment seemed to drag on and on. Guess I'll see you in the morning. She turned to go to her assigned guest room and retire, but lingered a while before walking away. No, wait. Rodan took a step forward, as if beginning to go around the table to meet her, then stopped. Yeah? She turned to face him, an expectant look on her face. What is it? Never mind. Sleep well. I'll see you in the morning. With that, he exited the room without looking back. Rodan sat on the edge of his bed. He could tell that the mattress had been purchased to accommodate someone half his size from the amount of deflection and creaking sounds he heard as he gingerly lowered his gigantic frame on top of it. He knew he needed to sleep, but the momentary respite from his device that the dinner had provided was now over, and he was once again staring into the digital void, responding to countless messages and queries about Cereus and everything else he was responsible for. Bartol's coming tomorrow. He had just received a message from his predecessor a few minutes prior. He had too many questions he wanted and needed answers to. Where the fuck have you been? Why did you give the order? Why did you choose me? These questions and more he dictated to his device to prepare for the morning. As he worked, his eyelids grew heavy as the wine and soup worked their way through him. He rubbed them to keep himself awake. A soft knock sounded at the door. It's probably Lee wanted to apologize for what happened earlier, even though there's no need. She's still a kid after all. He answered the door and saw Noe standing before him. Hair still slightly damp, and hanging at her shoulders, the aroma of flowery body soap filled his nostrils. She wore one of the field shirts that he had given her on the eve of the North Bloomfield battle, and black running shorts with slits in them. A recently applied layer of lotion gave her legs a glowing sheen under the low light of the room. Noe, I thought you were Lee. No, it's just me. Can I come in? Yeah, come on in. He waved his hand for her to enter. Though the guest room was a decent size, the only places to sit were the bed and a single chair at a small computer desk. Rodan sat on the bed, while Noe remained standing, arms folded across her chest. Look, Rodan, I just wanted to thank you for being so good to me these past few weeks. I know you've gone out of your way to look out for me during the battle, and by giving me all that work to keep me busy, it really did help me get my head right. Noe averted her eyes to the carpet around her bare feet. You really saved my life that day. Rodan's face remained calm and attentive, but internally, he was overcome by emotion. If he were less physically spent, he might have cried openly. He had had no idea his random message that Saturday afternoon would have such a profound impact on her life, that it was the difference between her standing before him right now, or not at all. His mind could not process or name the sentiment he was feeling at that moment. It was something like an amalgamation of joy, gratitude, and relief. A feeling so deep and rich, it touched his heart, Noe's, and every other sleeping soul in the house. No words, facial expressions, or actions could represent it with proper accuracy. All he could do was blink in response. Then, Noe moved closer to him. At eye level, while she stood and he sat on the bed before her. Truth is, this whole thing scares the shit out of me. Janus, Cereus, Limnic, the whole upheaval of society, it's always fucked with me since I was a little girl. I really did try to understand my mother all those years ago. But she couldn't see anything else but that monster Janus and his new world order. And now she's fucking dead. Killed by his own hands. It's so fucked up. The tears fell freely as she struggled to maintain her composure. Rodan stood to embrace her, letting the messages, Cereus, and its enemies fall away to make space for her. His body tensed with fear for both of their well-being, at the uncertain future before them, and the longing for understanding that he sorely lacked. Noe whispered breathlessly, "Thank you. Thank you." They separated, leaving only a sliver of space between them. Noe tilted her head upward, lips wet with anticipation. "You helped me so much." Upon contact, her lips were met with rivaled passion and boyish trepidation, causing a surge of heat to erupt at her core. They removed each other's clothing with controlled passion as they moved on to the bed. Naked and somewhat afraid, primordial instincts moved their bodies with complementary action, while each searched the other, looking for what they lacked. Giving, taking, pleasuring, and being pleasured. Both released sounds of ecstasy upon contact from the other. Hands squeezing, caressing, feeling. The intensity of their pleasure-seeking action rose with every passing moment to rival intertwined sentiments of guilt, shame, and fear that held them both as prisoners in the deepest chambers of their hearts. Rodan and Noe felt their bodies accelerate toward the inevitable release of tension in their own time. First she, then he, felt the force of the out-of-time and soul-stirring experience that comes at the end. Chests heaving, coated in glossy sweat, they clung onto each other. Both reveled in the afterglow of the temporary comfort and safety that provided a necessary liberation from the threats and naggings, internal and external, that consumed their weary psyches. Together, in their shared sanctuary, they found enchanted slumber and contentment that neither had known for a very long time.